Hello, 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 everyone. How are you? This is Tony Ambler-Wright, content strategist and master instructor for the National Academy of Sports Medicine. It's my sincere pleasure to introduce my two buddies and co-founders of Stick Mobility, Neal Valera and Dennis Dunphy, on our webinar today. So thanks so much, guys, for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. Been looking forward to this for gosh, I guess since we started talking about it, probably about 5-6 weeks ago. And yeah, just stoked to talk about Stick Mobility, talk about, what a useful tool, what a useful system it is, and how our certified professionals can benefit from it. So we'll talk about movement made better, combining Stick Mobility and NASM principles and programming. So
well, appreciate you having us on,
Tony. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. So before we get too far into it, I'm just going to briefly go over our agenda, and this is more to keep me on track than anything. Tend to be a little long-winded, as our producer Greg Esposito knows. So let's just talk through what we're going to talk about. We'll get into some introductions, a little more formal introductions. I want Dennis and Neal to talk a little bit about themselves and not only what they do with Stick Mobility, but how they got to creating Stick Mobility and founding the company. We'll talk about the Stick Mobility history, a lot of interesting stuff there that I'm eager for them to share with you. Some really interesting things as far as how the sticks were created and how the system was created. And then we'll get into the Stick Mobility systems and principles. And then we'll talk a little bit about NASM system, the NASM system and principles that guide it, more as a refresher than anything. And then we'll kind of talk about the integration of the two. Those of you who are familiar with NASM in our education and are certified through us know that we're very principles-based, systems-focused, and systems-driven. And Stick Mobility is as well. So there's a lot of synergy and a lot of alignment there that I'm excited to get into and talk about. And then from there, we'll get into some founders' favorites. So we'll have Neal and Dennis share with us some of their go-to exercises and techniques that they use either for themselves or with their clients and athletes. We'll get into Stick Mobility 101 and highlight some exercises and fundamental techniques that, if you're new to Stick Mobility, is a great place to start. Following this webinar, if you end up getting into Stick Mobility and wanting to learn more about it, that fundamentals and Stick Mobility 101 type program is going to be where it's at. And then finally, we'll wrap things up. We'll talk about next steps and then where you can find Neal, Dennis, and Stick Mobility out in the virtual world. All right. Does that look all right to you guys?
Sounds
Looks
good.
great.
All right, cool. So tell us about you. Want our audience to kind of learn about your backgrounds. Obviously, I've known you guys for a number of years now. I was introduced to you by one of my dearest friends, Matt Schmelka, who's a coach in the Bay Area where you guys are based out of. And, the first time obviously I've known you guys before you started Stick Mobility, actually. So big fans of you as individuals and coaches. And then once he introduced me to the Stick Mobility system and took me through some exercises, I was hooked. And so anyway, I just want you guys to share a little bit about you and how you got to this point.
Well, my name is Neal Valera, and so I've been in the fitness industry since 2007, so about 14 years now. Prior to that, I've just been obsessed with training, since probably middle school or high school, just trying to figure out ways to get better at whatever I was doing. And, back then I was playing competitive golf. I ended up playing golf in college. And so I was always looking at different ways. Of course, my first intro into training was probably more of that bodybuilding style mentality, because that was the material available to me, going to the stores, checking things out. So you try that, and, it worked because I was getting stronger and I didn't really have a background in strength training. But then, as I as I kept, getting older and researching more, I started getting into to kettlebells, and I was introduced to kettlebells probably in 2002 and started implementing that into my training. And then this just kept, leading into more and more research into what was going on. So I ended up getting certified through the RKC, which was run by Pavel Sosolin at the time in 2007. And then at the same time, I was going through the NASM CPT course. So I got my certifications in those, and then I started working at a club. So there was a Bally's back then. I don't know if they exist anymore.
No, they don't.
Yeah. So this was 2007, and I started training. And I was there for probably a year, and I decided that the gym or the corporate club environment, wasn't my thing. So then I went out on my own. And I went to a small studio, and that's where I met Dennis. And from there, I just kept continuing my education. I ended up going through the NASM CES. I went through the PES, along with other certifications and continuing ed. And then in 2015, Dennis and I created the system here. So,
yeah, and I started in the fitness industry in '99, so going on 22 years of being in this industry. It was definitely a meathead when I started. Liked lifting weight, and bigger is better, that mentality. So it served me a purpose, served me well. I grew up playing a lot of athletics, especially hockey, a lot of soccer. And strength was always the thing that I wanted to focus on. And it was after I met Neal that I started to realize strength is good, but your ability to move is just as important. So when he introduced me to rock climbing, I mean, I thought I had good hips until I got on the wall. And then I quickly realized my hips need a lot of work. So due with that, and also some previous injuries hitting into my mid-30s, I just realized, something's got to change, especially from a longevity standpoint. So that's where I started to change my focus as far as looking at things in a different perspective. And so in 2015, we took a stick yoga class and trained in stick yoga over in Santa Cruz under Dr. Arthur Fagenholtz. And we knew that there was a lot of strength component that was missing. So he used a stick to do stretches, but we were like, wow, if we combine some isometrics and really bring that neuromuscular control that's lacking in different positions, that can really change the game for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So that's where we created stick mobility. And actually, on the way back from Santa Cruz in the car, Neal's the one that came up with, he's like, stick mobility. And as I'm driving, I'm like, get on that and buy those domains. So I'm driving and Neal's buying the domains. And so from there, that's where it started. And we took about a year building out the system, figuring out, what components we're teaching here, what principles we're using. And we hit social media in May of 2015. And it's been fantastic ever since, man. So the growth has been great, and it's a lot due to, of course, early adapters like yourself, Tony, that saw the value and felt the value in it and understood what it can do for people. So we appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, we kind of started out just wanting to teach classes to our clients and, the local community. And then, with social media, we just started posting. And then what happened was, a strength coach from the NFL saw it and was like, hey, this is kind of cool. And hey guys, we're going to messaged us and said, hey guys, we're going to be in town. I know you guys are close to the 49ers, so I'd love to meet up and see what you guys are doing. And then from there, we met with him for 3 hours. He's like, I love it. I'd love to get certified and do this. And Dennis and I are like, well, we don't have a certification, but
yeah,
but we can create one. So then, we spent 3 or 4 months just taking what was in our head and what our experience from training all the years and putting it into a system.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I was going to say, I mean, it seemed to just take off like gangbusters when things launched, and obviously people can hit up your website and learn more about you both as well as the company. But I mean, if you look at your list of clients and customers and those that you've trained and educated using the sticks, I mean, it's pretty impressive roster. From professional sports across all the major league organizations. You guys also have some specific programming, which we'll also get into a little bit later, but your golf program in particular has garnered some accolades, right? If I remember correctly, golf.
Yeah. And with Golf Digest, for 2019 and 2020, we won best, I think they called it a stretching aid.
A stretching aid, yeah.
So we'll take it.
Yeah,
and we have quite a few professional golfers that
there's
use the sticks.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Well, obviously, we'll get into the individual techniques and the systems, and I think it'll be evident why so many people love the sticks and get to it. We've started to go down the history a little bit, but I'd love to hear what were the first sticks made out of, and then how did you finally decide on, the orange and black sticks, and what makes them different than some of the other tools that are out there?
Well, when we first started, we used rattan sticks, so it's a offshoot of bamboo. But what we found was there was a lot of inconsistencies from stick to stick. So, and they warped really easy. So that we were like, okay, well, we can't use those. And then we went to just making our own PVC pipe sticks that you would buy at the hardware store. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're using there. But they were really flimsy. And they warped pretty easily too. Not as easily as the rattan, but they would warp. So it was hard to keep shape in those. Mm-hmm. So Neal had some clients that were in the aeronautics industry, so they're the ones that proposed.
Yeah, so we connected with a couple of my clients who are now our business partners, and they were able to find material that was going to be stronger and more flexible than typical PVC, and also because PVC at a certain point it'll shatter, and that's something that we just we can't have that, right? And when we're working with people. So obviously anything can break. So if you're stressing these things past what they should do, that's not a good thing. But these things, I know Dennis and I have had the same sticks for years. If they're used within the system, they will last you a really long time.
We still have first generation with the original grips, where Mike used to he was actually using tennis tape. So if you have a first generation, Mike used to wrap each one of those. Talk about tedious. But that was the other thing too, is because with regular PVC, you don't have anything to grip onto. Mm-hmm. So me being a hockey player, I was like, well, I'll just tape the ends, right? So did the old hockey tape, but then people were complaining about the tackiness, and so we were like, okay, well, we got to definitely come up with something better than this.
Yeah. So then I was like, you know what? Why don't we just make it like a golf grip? Mm-hmm. Something you can just slide on. But then we designed it where they have little bumps on the grip, so you get a little more tactile feedback into your hands there. And they're nice and sticky on the ground too.
Yeah, no, they are. And the main reason I want to bring this up is I'm sure people say, oh, it's just sticks, when there's a lot that went into the development of the sticks, and to ensure the best client experience and outcomes, but also to ensure that they are safe as well as effective. So it's not just something you can go to the hardware store and pick up, or there may be some other companies that have similar products, but they probably didn't go through near the trial and error and development R&D that you guys went through. So so it always was really interesting to me just to know how much you guys put into it, and I thought our listeners would appreciate that. Whatever happened to the doc, the chiropractor? Did he didn't want to get in on this with you, or what?
No, that wasn't his thing. I mean, we discussed it with him. We told him, so we're going to develop our own system, and he was perfectly fine with that. I know Dr. Arthur is retired. At least when we last talked to him a couple summers ago, he's taken our course, so he's actually one of our coaches. But when we last talked to him, he said, "Look, I'm retiring." So he's still over in Santa Cruz. If you're over in Santa Cruz, look him up. He's a wonderful human being. Just a great person to hang out with. Very knowledgeable, but yeah, definitely his strength training aspect wasn't in his wheelhouse. So, and that was something he was willing to, he's like, look, you guys have a different perspective because of your background. He's like, and if it helped, and when he went through the course, he's like, this is fantastic stuff. So, he definitely backs it up. So, yeah.
Awesome. So, why the sticks, number one? So I guess to kind of fast forward a little bit, what is it about the sticks that, make it better for somebody who's looking to achieve enhanced mobility or move better overall? So why the sticks? Why the focus on mobility in general? I know in looking at your guys' qualifications and kind of talking about what led you up to that point, you both seem to really develop an affinity and more of a focus on movement. And I think overall as an industry, the focus toward better movement is becoming more common, which is great. But, what was it about mobility and leveraging and using the sticks to help accomplish that, that made you want to just get into it and develop a system and develop a product around it?
Well, I think with this, so when we started implementing the sticks with our clients, right away, it gave us a very easy way to get our clients into certain positions or give them stability, not just in their body, but in their brain. So we created a safe position from them to work from, where they could produce more time under tension. They could feel where their joints were in space. And then, being in that position with the sticks, having contact into the ground, the wall, the ceiling, we could create isometric tension. So we could really understand, what was going on.
I think also too, the other thing as far as switching over to focus on the movement aspect is me personally understanding limitations and seeing, okay, how much you pull is irrelevant if you can't get out of bed. It's, and as someone who had aspirations at a young age of being a professional bodybuilder, you look at all this mass and size, it's great. It looks fantastic. But when you can't just reach behind your back to scratch your mid back, that's not good. And then, like I said, with the experience of going rock climbing with Neal, that was really one of the biggest epiphanies where I was like, wow, this movement thing is important. So, and I've read interviews before where I think one article I remember reading where they interviewed older bodybuilders, and they asked, what is one of your biggest regrets, or what is something that you would go back and redo over again? And the vast majority of them said, I would work on my quality of movement, because that's one of their biggest things is now that I'm older, I don't move as well as I see other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think, when you mention looking a certain way as far as aesthetics, and that's a particular goal and outcome that people are looking to achieve. And when you start breaking down different exercises, pushing, pulling a certain amount of weight, I think we tend to lose sight of some of these fundamental patterns. If you look at a squat, for example, we've kind of siloed the squat into always thinking it's a loaded movement, when in fact, the squat is a fundamental movement across all populations, and something that, depending on where you grew up or where you currently live, just the act of squatting and getting down into a deep squat position is kind of fundamental to life and living. And so I think particularly in fitness, when we talk about something like the squat, we automatically assume it's a loaded exercise where we've kind of pigeonholed it into these particular confines and identified it within that context versus, look, this is just a pattern that, is necessary to do certain things. And looking at the ability to move and move with good quality, I think that should be a cornerstone of everyone's program. And, I think it's good to see that, more of a movement-based approach is becoming more popular and something that people, I think, are focusing more on, in addition to some of these other goals and outcomes that they want to accomplish. But, so we'll talk about the systems and principles, but, that's one of the great things I heard you mention, Neal, was when you started using the sticks with your clients, you were able to get them into positions that made them feel safe. And that's something that's really interesting. One of our advisory board members, Dr. Scott Cheatham, has been doing some research on training on unstable surfaces and the perception that people have when asked to do something on an unstable surface. And there's that fear and uncertainty involved with that. And that in and of itself can be a threat and can affect the client's movement. It can affect the outcome. It can affect their perception of the training experience and ultimately the experience with you overall. So I think that making the client feel comfortable and getting them to feel safe is extremely important, something that we tend to overlook, I think, sometimes. And so, the ability to use the sticks to not only assist with improving strength and stability and all those things, but also allowing clients to get into positions that not only are going to benefit them, but make them feel safe in the process, where they don't feel like they're going to get hurt. And they have that confidence then at that point to be able to do more things. So that's one of the things I love about them the most, is that as we start talking more about mobility and its importance and improving range of motion, the ability to use that range of motion, like we've all talked, like the three of us have talked about in the past, is the body can't move where it can't move. And if the body's never experienced a particular position, it's not necessarily going to want to get there. And so by using the sticks, leveraging the ability to create tension and stability in different positions just helps the client and their body and their neuromuscular system realize those positions safer and with more confidence, and that will translate to better carryover and outcomes. So really glad you mentioned that. And that's something that I think that's something we take for granted and that most fitness professionals maybe don't consider enough when they're working with clients, is their comfort level and how that perceived threat ultimately affects their ability to move and do the things that you're asking them to. So that's great.
Well, I think I know with Dennis and I, like if we're able to give people, these early wins, it just leads to long-term success.
Yeah, it builds that confidence level, which is huge.
Yeah, no doubt. So cool. Well, is there anything else about, just the history of the sticks and the system that you want to share before we kind of get into the system itself?
Well, I know you had mentioned the colors. I know when we did the logo, the gentleman that drew the logo that we have, I asked him for a bunch of color combinations, and then basically just showed it to everybody we knew. Said, here is all the color combinations. Give us your top 2 or 3. And across the board, orange and black, just everybody was like orange and black. Wow. So it was definitely one of, if not the first, it was the second. And so from a therapeutic standpoint, orange is a very therapeutic color. So it is eye-catching. It draws attention, so it doesn't hurt from that aspect either.
I think it doesn't hurt that we're in the Bay Area,
Oh, that too,
and
yeah.
everyone here loves
Yeah.
Giants.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
I think that had something to do with it too.
certainly. Yeah, no doubt. Well, yeah, I mean, I know for me, just the color is extremely distinct, and you can't miss it. So I think that was just an excellent choice for all those reasons. I can't speak to being a Giants fan, but even though I'm from Northern California, but, so
We had a good run.
yes. So before we get into the stick mobility principles and the system that you've developed, I just want to spend a few minutes going over the NASM principles from which our education is based, and then we'll get into not only the stick mobility principles, but then how we can combine them for optimum results and outcomes. And so, for those of you new to NASM or who have gone through our courses, everything that we look at is kind of looked at from the perspective of optimal human movement. And we definitely subscribe and promote a movement-based approach to training. I know Dennis and Neal, we've talked about this before. I think that's one thing. One of my goals as a content strategist at NASM is not only to expose our audience to our partners that are doing great work and have a great system that aligns well with what we do, but also just highlight how inclusive the NASM OPT model and corrective exercise framework is. And that, I think it's often overlooked, or maybe it's been around so long that people just don't realize that NASM was kind of at the forefront of this movement-based approach to training, along with some others, obviously, in the industry. But everything that we do is based on optimizing or trying to optimize the human movement system. And from there, if we're able to improve movement quality, then it allows us to achieve better improvements in muscular endurance, strength, and power, which would then translate into optimal performance. And so if we look at what's on the slide there, we just kind of have a refresher on the optimum movement outcome, which is at the bottom. And if we work backwards, we can see that optimum movement is predicated on optimum neuromuscular control. So you have to have the ability to, the nervous system has to have the ability to control the body in all three planes of motion at varying speeds and in different positions based on the demands that are being placed on it. And having optimum control, neuromuscular control, is predicated on optimum structural alignment. And what feeds into those things is what's at the top. And so, for us, we look at the body as a kinetic chain, where we have the three primary systems that interact. While they're interdependent systems, while they're independent systems, they have to work interdependently with each other to help us achieve optimum movement. And so, first, if we look at the muscular system, that's generally what most fitness professionals tend to focus on, or the myofascial system. And ultimately, what we're looking to achieve there is to optimize length-tension relationships. So there's a direct correlation between a muscle's length and its ability to generate tension. And so, an easy way to remember that is a muscle's length will dictate its strength. And if there are imbalances present where there's been adaptations within the myofascial system where certain tissues have become potentially shortened, adaptively shortened, or are overactive neurologically. And consequently, there are muscles or tissues on the opposite side of a joint that have become relatively lengthened and underactive. That creates alterations in that length-tension relationship and leads to muscle imbalances. And so that whole premise of muscle balance, more from an activation and joint control perspective, not necessarily from a symmetry or aesthetics perspective, is what feeds the entire NASM approach to training. corrective exercise and training. And so if you have altered muscle balance, then that's going to lead to altered nervous system involvement. So the nervous system is what controls the muscles, and it's a feedback loop. So if there are alterations in muscle length and tension, that's going to change the feedback that goes to the nervous system, which will then influence the nervous system's ability to activate the right muscles in the right sequence with the right amount of force, based on the demand that's being placed on the body. And so as it relates to the nervous system, we talk a lot about force couple relationships. And essentially that's just muscle synergies or groups of muscles that when they contract together are responsible for controlling or creating movement around an axis or around a joint. And so if we have altered muscle balance, then that will directly affect the force couples that control the joints. And if we have altered force couples where certain muscles are maybe activating too much and pulling the joint into a certain position too much, and others aren't able to control that, then that can lead to abnormal wear and tear on the joint structures and on the joints themselves, which leads us into that articular system. And so if we have altered muscle balance, we have altered force couples, then that will lead to altered arthrokinematics or joint motion, which again, depending on the load, depending on the activity and the frequency of all of those things, can lead to abnormal stress and wear and tear. And so ultimately, in order to get our clients to achieve optimum movement and achieve their goals safely and effectively, we need to be able to identify any inefficiencies or abnormalities within this kinetic chain from a muscle balance and ultimately a movement perspective. And so the process that we use for that is our 3-step process, where we want to identify any potential limitations or alterations in movement, compensations. We want to develop a plan of action, and we want to implement that plan. And so we have our corrective exercise process, which allows us to do that. And then we have our optimum performance training model, which is a progressive system that allows you to leverage the law of progressive overload and the principle of specificity to get different training outcomes with your clients. So that's the NASM approach. That's what we focus on. And then what I love about stick mobility, your principles and systems, is that within the NASM corrective exercise continuum and the OPT model, you can utilize the sticks in a variety of different ways for a variety of different outcomes, depending on where in that process you are, or your clients are rather. So anything you guys want to add to that or expand on at all?
No, that pretty much hits it on the head. So
yeah,
no, we're good.
That ability to, to control your joints and, move freely is what we're looking for before we start to really, start to add load.
Yeah. I think people forget the responsibility of joints, and joints knowing what their functions are supposed to be is kind of misunderstood or maybe trivialized a little too much. Mm-hmm. So if we can bring that more to the forefront, it's the prerequisite. It's great to have a good looking car, but if the engine is crap, it's irrelevant. So,
or the components are,
or the components are broken down, or they're not
aligned.
Aligned. Yeah. There's a lot of different things,
Absolutely. Well, that's where I know we've talked about this before too, and the whole concept of mobility, I think, is becoming more and more prevalent and a focus of individuals' programs, and that should be. But one of the key components of mobility is the ability to not only enhance range of motion at the joints in different positions and through different patterns, but ultimately enhance the ability to control and utilize that range of motion functionally, however you want to define function, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where, with your system, that's what I love so much about it is, sure, you can use the sticks for passive gains in range of motion and enhanced flexibility, but ultimately you want to use the ability to create force against the sticks, irradiation, leverage the sticks as much as possible to develop strength and control through those different ranges of motion. And again, that's where, Neal, we talked about this a few minutes ago, is that if a client is presented with a position where the body senses instability, then what is their response going to be to that?
They freeze up,
tighten back up, and they're not going to be able to do what you want. Exactly. So that's where the sticks become such an invaluable tool as you're pursuing enhanced mobility and stability and control in all these different positions, because it provides that safe haven, that safe environment for the neuromuscular system to do what it needs to do. Gray Cook, Dr. Clark, and others, have said this. It's like taking the parking brake off. Basically, you're allowing the body to kind of move to its potential and perform to its potential, because you've taken the brakes off of it. You've put the body in a position where it feels like it can do those things and it doesn't have to protect itself. So, if you would mind just going through the principles a little bit and just talk us through that, I think that would be really beneficial for the listeners and viewers.
Well, the first principle is leverage and stability, which is what the actual tool gives you. So when you utilize good leverage, you can overcome the body's resistance to move into a certain direction. But within that, we also teach increasing and decreasing lever lengths is a really great way to overcome limited ranges of motion, but also as a way to regress and progress stimulus for the body.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then as far as stability, so with the stick, we talked about that as giving someone a stable platform. But the other thing that happens is when we push or pull onto the stick, we create stability up the kinetic chain. So for example, if I was just to hold the stick in front of me and I had to say to someone, hey, let's just pull apart on the stick, all of a sudden, without really cueing them to, hey, I want you to contract your shoulder, I want you to retract your shoulder blades. Just that action of them pulling apart on the stick sends messages all the way up to that posterior chain. And then if I say squeeze the stick together, they can do the same thing in the anterior chain. So it gives us simple cues to create tension where we want it with less thinking. Sometimes, maybe as a trainer, we say too much, like, hey, squeeze your glutes, contract your abs, hold, try to breathe. And it's just, it's too much stimulus for the client, and they're like, oh, okay, well, it's like, let's give them as little instruction as possible at first, and then let's just kind of see what happens naturally, and then we'll just slowly kind of give them cues along the way.
I mean, and not to
paralysis by analysis.
Right. And secondly, I mean, we talk amongst each other, so we use terminology and we know what we're talking about. But somebody off the street, a new client, you might as well be speaking a foreign language to them. So if someone doesn't have the awareness when you say contract your glutes, I mean, somebody's like, I have no concept of what you're talking about. So when you use the stick,
this is their glute contraction.
Right.
Yep.
I don't know. Which is so true, right? So, at least with the stick, you can just give them a simple instruction and then see what takes place. And that actually leads us into the second principle, which is feedback. Mm-hmm. Because then they're getting that kinesthetic learning that we're trying to talk to them all the time about, but let's get them to feel it.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Neal, you mentioned, holding the stick out in front and then having them actively pull apart, but then, you can immediately change the sensation and the stimulus and ultimately the feedback they get if, you apply resistance to the stick in one direction or another, or if they're doing a partner drill where, they have to pull or push against another. And that feedback is, it's a game changer when you start doing exercises and movements in that fashion. Yeah.
I know we also have on the feedback, we're also talking about visual feedback. So the stick gives us as coaches a visual aspect to be able to understand what's happening when we ask a client to go through a certain task or go through a certain movement. So we can look at the stick in relation to their movement and see if there's things that we feel need to be rectified or cleaned up.
Yeah, it's like, when we're doing our wrist circles and we ask them, try to draw a smooth circle, and we see a square, we can tell right away, hey, we need to develop a little bit more control here. And we know, like, they're missing some points along that motion, and we need to start cleaning up. So everything is an assessment, essentially.
Yeah. So I know coaches ask us, well, what assessment protocols you use? And we tell people, look, use what you feel comfortable with, whether you use the NASM assessments or FMS, whatever assessment protocols you want to use. But within that gives you your base. But then with the sticks, every time you give somebody a task, you're still always assessing everything, just to make sure that movement is being sourced from the areas that you want it to be sourced from.
Yeah. No, love it. Love it. So great stuff on feedback, and then getting into irradiation, isometrics, and coordination. We've touched on a couple of those briefly, but if you wouldn't mind just giving us a rundown on those two, that would be great.
Well, radiation, I guess a good example would be if you were to make a fist, in front of you, and you if you squeezed it as hard as you could, it would send. You wouldn't just feel your forearm, you'd feel this all the way up to the shoulder. So with the radiation, we're able to connect the body together, but we're also able to build more systemic strength. So when we have a stick in our hand, right, if I was just to squeeze my hand, I can only develop so much tension. But if I squeeze the stick and I pushed it into the ground, now I'm recruiting my lats, I'm recruiting, some of my serratus, my midsection, and then we ask, hey, squeeze your glutes too. And now we get everything. And then with that irradiation, depending on where we're pushing, right? If I say, look, maybe we push into the ceiling, now we're activating more of that posterior chain. Or if I push into the wall, now maybe we're getting some of that, that lateral chain.
Mm-hmm. And it's a great way for people to really understand and develop their own internal knowledge of what's going on, because when we tell somebody, okay, we're going to do some priming movement, we're going to do some deadlifting prime because we have deadlifting on the menu for today. Well, let's go ahead and prime that deadlift at 50% levels of irradiation. Some people will be like, well, what's my 50%? Well, that's part of the learning process. Is on a scale of 1 to 10, we're asking you to exert about 50% of your max effort, right? So that's all part of that whole progression of getting a client to understand more about what they are capable of. So we expect them to, over the course of months or years, when you say, hey, give me 50%, they automatically respond. They know. They're like, okay, boom, I'm going to do this at 50%, or let's get some active stretching in. You're going to use about 30% level of irradiation. And they automatically know what that is.
Yeah. Awesome.
I know for me personally, for radiation, it was a really game changer to understand how to irradiate tissues and access more tissues, especially on parallel work. So that was a big deal there, because your neural drivers predominantly are your glutes, abs, and your grip. So really delving into the system and using it more with other tools, gripping those parallels even harder, just access more core activation. So that was a real eye opener for me, just from a learning standpoint.
Yeah,
and we love isometrics. Most of our program takes people by surprise because of how much strength training we actually use. I know from a marketing standpoint, when you look at our social media, you're going to see mostly stretching poses on there. But when we're taking the education, about 70% of our program is just pure strength training.
Yeah. Well, I love that focus on isometrics too. As we've talked about before, the ability to focus on the different aspects of the muscle contraction continuum and muscle action spectrum, eccentric, isometric, concentric. Most people don't focus at all on the eccentric or isometric aspect of of an exercise. And so the ability to really exploit that and leverage that with the sticks is huge, and something that, most people don't do enough and definitely need more of. So I love that. And then the coordination piece, how would you use the sticks to enhance somebody's coordination?
Well, I think, just by using, so let's just say, for example, we're using one stick, right? You're typically holding it in one hand, and so if it's on our right side, we're typically moving the right side of our body. So you're able to see the difference between left and right side. And the other thing is, when we start doing our hip drills, we're asking people to, to make different shapes, or different movement tasks, as opposed to, I don't know, we don't really have like set rep ranges.
No,
I'd say it's, but the ability for them to see, okay, now we're lifting our foot up, past the grip or to the sticker. And now we're having them touch different places on the stick. And over time, they've taken their foot through, all these different motions, and then they go out and they hike, or they do something, and they're like, oh, hey, I can lift my leg over here. That's, that's easy. Or when we start doing our wrist drills, or shoulder drills, you're holding the stick in one hand, and now we're able to see, hey, my left hand doesn't work as well as my right. So let's build this up, because you can see, just as a coach and someone doing a wrist circle with the left hand, all of a sudden you're like, oh man, this doesn't look anything like my right. So just improving that quality transfers over to daily movements.
Yeah. And I know, like, for something just like our kayaking motion, we can put a stick in somebody's hands and should tell them, hey, envision your kayaking. Let's get the scapula moving. And most people going into a forward kayak, most people are pretty solid at it. But then you tell them to reverse and go backwards, and it's a totally different story. You'll see a lot of people just literally freeze up, like they just stop. And so once again, improving coordination over a period of time, it goes from something that they literally struggle and have to just mentally focus in and lock in on, to something we say, down the road, we're like, okay, give me 30 seconds of reverse kayaking to warm those scaps up. And they just grab the stick and they go into it. And the quality of the movement is drastically improved from what it was, a month earlier or 2 months earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's huge. And, again, kind of the underlying tenet is being able to control the body and control unloaded movements, essentially, before trying to tackle loaded patterns. It's not to say you can't do loaded patterns, but I think it sounds like with the sticks, it's just much easier to be able to identify asymmetries and those weaknesses or limitations within a client's different patterns than you might be able to see otherwise doing maybe more traditional exercise. And that's another thing that I really love is the ability to identify those asymmetries. We know that asymmetry is a pretty significant risk factor for musculoskeletal non-contact injury and pain. And so just being able to easily identify that and then implement strategies to be able to improve that is really important with our clients. So I love that, the feedback and the ability to improve that coordination over time, just like you would with other exercises, but maybe a little bit easier with the sticks. So cool. And I'll save this question, but I do want you guys to talk a little bit about, where do you find yourselves using the sticks most within a client's program? Is it preparation? Is it everything? So we'll talk about that here in a minute, but just want to get you guys thinking about that here briefly. So now let's talk about just stick mobility and NASM integration. When you look at, how these two systems can work together really, really well and effectively. So, with NASM, we're all about assessments. In order to be able to design an effective program, you have to be able to identify where your clients need it to improve. And, you want to look at those as areas of opportunity. And so not only do you want to assess your client physically and objectively, but you also want to take them through a thorough, subjective assessment, figure out what it is they want to accomplish. And, ultimately, how does that translate to the goals they want to achieve from their exercise and training program? And so, for us, we have a movement assessment process. With our new CES curriculum, we have a CES assessment flow that starts with more of a total body pattern. And then based on how somebody performs in each of the different movement patterns, you can then use kind of a decision tree to determine what assessments you should follow up with, ultimately finishing with mobility assessments, looking at different parts of the body, whether it's the foot and ankle, the knees, hips, trunk, neck, or shoulder. And then once you've identified the areas that you want to focus on from a programming perspective, then we have our 4-step process, which is first to use self-myofascial techniques to improve the ability for joints to move through the desired range of motion. So we're going to downregulate the nervous system. We're going to influence the soft tissue a little bit with these self-myofascial techniques and use. And then we want to enhance that with quote unquote lengthening techniques, where we can use a variety of different stretching protocols and techniques to be able to further enhance that range of motion around a target joint or throughout a desired pattern. And then our 3rd step is activation. So we want to, now that we've enhanced range of motion, we've enhanced the tissue's ability to lengthen within a desired range of motion, we then have to teach the nervous system how to use that range of motion, or rather teach the muscles around that area to control that range of motion. So it's more of an isolated type pattern. And then finally, we look at integration, where we then take all those improvements in range of motion and the local control at whatever areas we're focusing on and integrate that into more of a functional dynamic pattern. And so what's great about the sticks, what's great about the sticks is that really you can use them in steps 2, 3, and 4. As it relates to the NASM process. You could probably use them in step 1 too, if you get creative enough with some of the self-myofascial techniques and inhibitory techniques. And so, again, our premise is we're not just trying to improve range of motion for the sake of improving range of motion. Ultimately, we want to improve functional movement patterns and movement outcomes. And we're going to do that using this very specific 4-step process. And then once you've improved movement in the areas that you've identified need it, then we have our progressive training system in the OPT model that you would use. It's focused on, leveraging acute variables, different sets, reps, tempo schemes to get a certain response from the body. And so the way we would kind of view this is you would do your inhibit, lengthen, activate, and integrate as part of a movement prep series prior to performing your OPT training session. Or if you wanted to just do this 4-step process as an entire session, you could certainly do that. That's more of a, movement oriented session. And so, again, the sticks are extremely versatile, and you can use them in virtually every phase of the OPT model as well, depending on the exercise or the technique that you're having your clients or athletes perform. So really, really versatile. And that's the great thing. And I just love it. I think, the focus on principles and systems is something that most fitness professionals don't look at enough. We tend to, chase shiny objects. We love new toys and new tools, and we don't necessarily think about the context in which we are using them or the outcomes in which we're trying to get with our clients. And so every exercise, every technique should have a rationale behind it that ultimately helps deliver the client to the goals that they want to accomplish and provides them a great, safe experience in the process. And so, yeah, I'm just stoked. I love them, love using them within my programs and my client programs. And I know those of you who are watching, if you don't use them, use the sticks, and this excuse me, this piques your interest enough to get into it. I know you're going to love it too, and your clients will too. So anyway, that's from an integration standpoint. That's really all we need to say there. Do you guys have anything you want to add on that?
Well, I mean, I think I could maybe just give a quick example of how to integrate into that process right there. So let's just say we wanted to improve some hip extension. So let's just say we take our basic hip flexor stretch, but instead we have the stick out in front of us and we're holding it out in front to our 12 o'clock, because we like to use a clock system to give people awareness of where they're moving their joints in space or where they're going to place the stick. So we could place the stick at 12 o'clock, we're in that half kneeling hip flexor stretch. But as we could drive down, create that irradiation. But as we drive down, what happens naturally is your hips kind of want to tuck a little bit, right? And so you kind of force this hip extension, but we're getting this, this contraction in the glutes. So from there, we can use that as our active lengthening. And then, the next step where we do this activation, now maybe we go into a bridge position where we take the stick and we can place it across our hips and we drive down, push our hands down into our hips. So now that forces us to push harder into hip extension. But, because we're creating this internal load and force, we can kind of sense our hip position. And then from there, now maybe we take this into a more integrated movement pattern. So we could do a lunge sequence where we're in a split stance and we're taking it down into a lunge where we're dropping the knee down towards the ground, but we have these sticks as stability. So maybe we start in this monkey hang and slowly drop down, and we're focusing on hip extension as we drop down into this lunge. But we're able to deload the body just a little bit with the sticks, and then eventually, take them away.
Love it. That was a perfect example, and I love that the glute bridge with the stick across the hips, especially for that posterior sling, posterior oblique subsystem integration, where you're activating the lats while you're getting the glutes. It's a great kind of lower threshold posterior oblique subsystem exercise to get that synergy working and force couple working, and then that integration example is fantastic. So yeah, I mean, the sky's the limit ultimately, but that's the beauty of a system, is that once you understand that framework and you have your exercise library and toolbox, you just plug and play the right tool for the job at hand. So perfect example. Thank you.
Yep.
Love it. So cool. Well, speaking of monkey hang, I wanted to have you guys share some of your kind of favorite exercises, go-to techniques with our viewers, with our listeners. And so the first one we have here is the monkey hang. So, we had some videos teed up, but for some reason, the tech isn't really cooperating. So they're kind of choppy. They're not as smooth as we'd like. So we've got some still images. And Neal, would you mind just kind of talking us through the intent of the monkey hang and what it's working on?
Yeah. So
why you like it?
One of the reasons I love the monkey hang so much is we can do it from multiple stances. So right here in this picture, we're in a lunge position, but we could take this to half kneeling, or we could do it from standing, or even a seated position, depending on, your focus or, your client's ability. But here in the lunge position, so I can work that split stance, right? And with the stick there, I'm holding with two hands. So this is deloading it, as much as we can. So we start from an easy position, right, for someone, but we can get the legs, time under tension. So even holding an assisted lunge for 30 seconds to a minute here is pretty challenging. Now from here, so I can either do this as a passive hang, right? So I can get a nice little stretch in the lats, all the way down to the hips, maybe down to the quad, depending on the foot position. Or I can actively drive the stick into the ground, and teach that scapula how to retract and depress, so we can start working grip strength. We can start teaching the body how to be comfortable in a hanging position, and then from this motion here, so you didn't see the video, but what we're going to do is we start to rotate, right? So as we rotate, if I was to rotate to my left here, then I would start to create more length along that lat. And now if I started to rotate open, then I would create a bigger stretch through that chest and anterior sling, and then you're also getting some internal rotation on the back hip. But you're bringing a transverse plane movement to a typically, sagittal motion that people think, because even if you're stabilizing in the sagittal plane, if you start adding transverse motion to that upper body, it's now a transverse movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when you look at, obviously sports, gait, and locomotion, and everything else, I mean, it's all about controlling and producing and controlling forces in the transverse plane. So, love this one. This is great. Cool. All right. So, what's the next one? We've got.
Another monkey hang.
Great. There we go. The bow and arrow. All right. So, Dennis, you want to talk us through this one?
Yeah, the lateral line is something that we feel is really underutilized or underdeveloped, but that lateral line running from the side of your foot all the way up to the side of the head is integrated into every aspect of movement. And it's really the glue that connects your posterior and anterior tissue lines together. So you definitely want to make sure that your lateral lines are open and resilient. So here we have our lateral bow and arrow. So the objective here is with Rania here, she is looking to open up her right lateral chain. So she's going into the overhead position on that right hand. The stick there is at 9 o'clock. And what she's going to do is with the top hand, she's going to push the stick down into the floor, and that's going to light up that upper right lateral chain. And then when she starts the movement, she's going to drive her right hip out to 3 o'clock. At the same time, then she's going to push the stick away from her out to the 3 o'clock position. Gotcha. So your objective is not to see how far you can bend the stick. It's to see how far you can separate your hips from the stick. So we're trying to create that space. And even though the top arm is lengthening, it is reflexively pulling. So your bottom arm is the one that's actively pushing. Top arm is reflexively pulling. So
you're getting that isometric in that lengthened position, which is fantastic. Obviously great for flexibility and mobility gains. Greg, do you think we could get maybe just a still image of the finish position on this one? Stand by, everyone.
Oh, there we go. Yep, that looked good too.
Yeah, we got a snippet of it, but you can see how she's, yep.
There we go.
There we go.
So now here she's opening up her left lateral chain. And when people do this, once again, like we kind of talked about the feedback on the second principle, you as a coach are using the visual feedback to see perhaps one lateral chain is a little bit shorter than the other. It's a little inhibited. And that can go a long way for you to figure out, okay, if someone is suffering lower back pain, maybe it's because one lateral line is much more restricted than the other lateral line, and therefore creating a huge imbalance in the way that the body deals with force and stress.
Yeah.
And then I also think if you're looking at her feet too, she's got to deal with frontal plane forces there as well.
Yeah, no, it's great. Well, and that, brings up another point too, is that, with exercise, I think oftentimes we just think about the concentric aspect, like we talked about. So when working on that lateral line, or, the lateral subsystem, as we refer to it in the NASM materials, we focus a lot on, concentric activation, but muscles have to lengthen before they shorten reflexively, right? So if you think back to, our integrated performance paradigm, muscles have to eccentrically lengthen, which allows them to store that potential energy. They have to isometrically stabilize, and then they, can unload and release that kinetic energy. And so the ability to, again, kind of generate tension and force in these lengthened positions is a great way to, get muscles to respond how they need to in life and in sport and in movement. So you're leveraging that ability for the muscle to store and release energy as you train it through these different, or the tissues rather, as you train them through these different positions. You're not just focusing always on concentric muscle activity or muscle action. So yeah, love it. Great stuff. And let's do the last one here, which is the slap shot for all you hockey fans.
The Dennis right there.
Game on, man. So with the slap shot, we're going to address thoracic rotation, but we're also going to address frontal plane movement of the hips. So as you can see here, Neal has the stick across the low back. And when you're doing this, we want to make sure the stick is across the low back. Some people will move it up to the mid back or high back, which is fine if that's what you're after. But for this base movement, we want it right across the low spine. And then he's going to go into a hinge pattern. And once he's in the hinge pattern, he's going to pull the stick across his midline. So there's where the leverage of the stick is going to allow him to increase his thoracic rotation. And once he's hit this end range, he's going to place the end of the stick on the floor to bring that stability that we're looking for. Then from there, he's going to pull apart on the stick. When he pulls apart on the stick, that posterior line is going to activate, which is going to, once again, if we think about angles, if we're decreasing one angle, the opposing angle increases. So by pulling apart on the stick and activating that posterior line, the anterior line has to open up as a result of that. So we, once again, actively are increasing that thoracic rotation. Yeah. And then we can once again use leverage by shifting laterally through the hips into a lateral lunge to once again stimulate and increase your thoracic rotation. And we will also, when we shift from hip to hip, we'll hit the adductor line, which is really involved in a part of your thoracic rotation and your ability to do that. So I know a lot of trainers really don't think about the connectivity between the lower and upper extremities in movements. But a slap shot is a great way to really get people who may not be in that mindset to feel that connection between the adductors and your thoracic rotation.
Yeah, no doubt. And Greg, would we be able to get another end position on this one, please? Awesome. Yeah, and that's other thing you mentioned, Dennis, was as you're applying force on the stick and you get that posterior chain to activate, that forces the anterior line and anterior chain to elongate. Neurologically, that also takes advantage of reciprocal inhibition. Just for our NASM listeners out there, just a great example, functional real world kind of example of reciprocal inhibition at work, where by applying force with one set of muscles, you reciprocally inhibit the muscles on the opposite side, and that will allow you to get into those ranges of motion more effectively. So,
I think whenever you can couple frontal plane motion through the legs and that thoracic rotation, it lends itself well to many sports, right? Whether it's golf or baseball or hockey or speed skating or, you'll see some sort of frontal plane hip motion and thoracic rotation.
Yeah, no, I love it. And just obviously there's just tremendous variability in how you can use the sticks and the different positions, which, we'll talk about your guys' YouTube channel and everything else, all the other resources available here in a minute. But, the ability to create stability and strength in different positions, some might say odd positions, depending on who you're working with, is extremely important. The ability to create tension and strength, really more from like a dead start position, again, is extremely important, something that people tend not to focus on as much. So awesome. Well, thanks for sharing those examples. Gives great insight into kind of the thought behind the system and the different exercises and techniques that you guys have developed and use with your athletes and clients. So let's talk about wrapping this up. What's next and where we can learn more.
Well, I know,
actually,
like you had mentioned, there's our stick mobility 101.
Yeah. So if you guys, we'll highlight the YouTube channel here, but if you guys want an great introduction to the fundamentals of stick mobility and using the sticks within a program, kind of your stick mobility 101, if you will, hit up the YouTube channel, Stick Mobility, and there's a playlist titled Beginner's Basics. I think there's 16 16 videos in the playlist. Just a wealth of information in that. But yeah, you guys have. It was too many for me to count how many videos you guys have on your channel. But any guesses or approximations for the viewers?
I think we've got over 300 now.
Yeah, something like that. And even just in the fall, we're running 3 free workouts a week. We have some great coaches that are doing that for us. And so they're just follow along. 45 minutes. They're going to give you 15 minutes of joint mobilizations, 15 minutes of some strength training protocols, and then 15 minutes of just some active stretching. And so I think we're at 140 workouts, if I'm not mistaken. Wow. Okay. Yeah. We instituted that right after the pandemic hit last year. We knew that since gyms were closed, people were going to be at home looking for options. And a lot of them don't have all the kettlebells or tools that you would have at the gym. Yeah. So for us, grab a stick. Let's show you how to be strong and mobile in the convenience of your own home. So we figured, you know what, let's give them as much content as they can get. And you can go back and do all the classes, just repeat them, and everything's just going to be, and you're going to find after you develop an understanding of what we're teaching, even the end user at home may be like confident enough where he or she may even go, well, let me check this out, and add their own little variations. And that's what we love about it, is once you grasp the concepts and the principles, have fun, enjoy it, play around with it.
Yeah. Forgot about that. The enjoyment part. Yeah. Should have fun in the process too. No, I love it. So YouTube, just your guys' channel is fantastic. And I would encourage everybody to check it out, and you'll find yourself lost for hours in all the video content there. So, what's next? Well, one of the things I love about our partners is that we try to, obviously, my intent is to try to highlight and promote you guys as much as possible. And then, as part of our partnerships, we get pro partner discounts exclusive to the NASM community. And so for NASM certified professionals, I think the normal discount as part of our partnership is 15%. But for those of you who've taken the time to listen and or watch the webinar today, you guys are going to kick down a little bit something extra if I remember correctly. So what are you going to do for those who've been watching?
If you're in on this webinar for the whole month of March, if you go and use the code NASMWEB20, it's all capital letters. That's going to be 20% off products and education. So if you want to jump in on a course, you're going to get 20% off on the course, whether it's the online or the live courses, which we are scheduling, and hopefully they take place.
Awesome.
That's a big factor. Yep.
No, that's phenomenal discount. And once you get to the website, you guys have a variety of different options available in terms of the sticks. They come in different sizes based on your height. And then you guys have some other programs available as well, runners program, your golf mobility program. And then you mentioned the course or the certification. You guys have your stick mobility level 1 cert, which you do have an online version, but you hope to be getting back into the live event soon. So check that out, NASM Web 20 for the month of March 2021. And then for those of you in the stick mobility family, if you're interested in NASM education, there's an exclusive discount offered to you as well, which is 35% off NASM courses and specializations. And that code is STICKMOB35, STICKMOB35. So if what we've talked about has been of any interest to you and you want to check out some of what NASM has to offer at a discount, then you can use that code as well. But awesome stuff. So yeah, let's wrap it up. If you have any questions, this is going to be posted to the NASM Facebook channels, YouTube. Feel free, and YouTube. Feel free to answer questions if any come up, and we'll do our best to get back to you. And then where to find us. Stick Mobility, most importantly, you can go to their website at stickmobility.com. Instagram is @stickmobility. Their YouTube channel is Stick Mobility. And then they've got a great podcast, which I had the pleasure and the honor of being a part of. So they've had a number of great guests on there. A lot of great content. So I'd encourage you guys to check out the podcast as well. I believe you guys post the videos on YouTube also, right? For
yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
Cool. And then NASM, you can reach us at NASM_fitness on Instagram. Our website's nasm.org. And then our YouTube channel is National Academy of Sports Medicine, NASM in parentheses. And then we've got a variety of different podcasts as well that you can check out on all the major platforms. So fellas, it's been a sincere pleasure and really, really glad to have had the opportunity to talk to you today and hopefully get our audience stoked about Stick Mobility and how they can use it with their clients, athletes or patients to get fantastic results and outcomes, really augment what they're doing from a programming standpoint. So I know your time is valuable. You guys are both busy, still coaching and training and running a business. And so really appreciate you giving us 90 minutes of your day to talk to us. And hopefully we can do it again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, that was
Yeah, thanks so much for having us on, man.
Thank you, Tony.
Really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, till next time, this is Tony Ambler-Wright. And on behalf of Neal, Valera, Dennis Dunphy at Stick Mobility and NASM, we'll talk to you soon. Have a great one, everyone.